So, for the past 3 years, I've been working remotely for Microsoft. And this past week, we actually had a lot of people traveling into the office, and it was a really good opportunity for people to meet up. Now, I have this one particular team that I work with, and we have a lot of friction in the work that we're doing. So, there's a lot of emails and stuff that go back and forth, and you can tell that people aren't totally aligned on what they're asking for, what they need, and you can kind of feel the friction in the messaging. So this past week, I had a meeting scheduled by this team where they invited me into the office and I got to meet with them. So the way that this worked is that I went into a meeting room that was kind of hidden within a little team neighborhood, so kind of felt like a little back meeting room. I sat down with one person, and then the other person from their team joined us. And right away, I kind of felt like, okay, it's 2 against 1, like what's gonna happen here? Because, like I said, we've had some friction working together. So I'm already a little bit nervous, but here we go. And the first thing that these two say to me is, thank you so much for your partnership. So right away, I go from being like, oh my god, I'm really scared, I'm really nervous about like how much they're going to be grilling me, how frustrated they're going to be when they're talking to me, and the first thing they say is thank you. It caught me off guard, but to be honest, it was really relieving. And they started explaining that in the past little bit of us working together, when I started actually chiming in to participate in some of the activities we were doing and trying to get some alignment, they actually really valued that partnership. They started to actually feel heard. Now, throughout the rest of this meeting, one of the individuals was extremely passionate in what he was talking about because we're working on a project together, and he was looking very serious and he was looking me right in the eye, and his voice kept getting louder and he kept seeming more angry. But I was sitting there wondering, is this individual actually mad at me? Because I think we're agreeing on the same things. And it turns out that by the end of the meeting, he ended up saying again, thank you so much for all of your help. And I realized, despite the roller coaster of emotions and all of the energy in the room, that they were actually very happy to be working with me. So I wanted to share with you this story because I wanted to talk about building partnerships in software engineering today. And I think that this is an important topic because a lot of the other content that I put out is about programming, but you've probably seen other videos where I do try to bring in software engineering topics. And I think that this is a really good one because I'm not going to talk about code at all today. I want to talk about working with other teams and finding partnerships in the least expected places. So I'm going to give you a little bit more context about my interactions with this team so that you can understand the landscape that we're working with. So my team operates as a platform. I actually have a couple of teams that I manage that operate as platforms. And the way that this works is that we have other partners that use these platforms, and depending on the platform part and the teams, these interactions and relationships can look a little bit different. With this particular team, their team had expectations about how our platform was operating and the things that we, on my team, would be responsible for. And conversely, my team and how our platform works had different expectations about how this team was integrating with our platform. You can already see that if we have two different perspectives here, it's a great opportunity for friction to arise. And I think historically, what had been happening was that an email chain would start and you could tell that the people were kind of frustrated with something that was happening. And this is normal, right? When things are happening that are not expected, people can get frustrated. It's not like they're yelling at us or anything like that, but you can kind of sense that people are unhappy about how things are going. And that's totally okay. But this type of thing seemed to be continuing on. And to layer on another facet to this, we actually had another project that we're collaborating on. And in this particular case, it was another opportunity where this team was depending on us. And this is a particular project that, from my group's perspective, I'm sort of leading this effort. I'm not leading the entire effort, I'm just one part in the larger effort. But from my platform team's perspective, I have a responsibility here. So this team that I was just referring to was coming to me sort of having a lot of issues in what was going on with the project. And that's kind of the lay of the land before we started kind of working together and making things better. So I want to walk through something that happened. I want to say for me, it was almost accidentally, but it was about transforming this relationship that felt like a lot of friction into something that I feel like is extremely positive for both of us. And we feel like we have a really solid partner working on this project and our efforts together going forward. So I would love to take credit for this, like I went into this scenario being like, oh, I totally see what's happening here, I'm going to make everything better. But like I said, it was almost accidental, but for me, I was focused on kind of what I think is just, I'm going to use air quotes here, like doing the right thing. So what I started to observe was First, in this particular project that I was responsible for, I started to notice the friction specifically coming to me, right? When the other friction that I was talking about with the broader team was coming up, this is something that I felt like, okay, there's other individuals that are dealing with this, they're navigating it. I can't possibly be in every conversation, and I have full, confidence that other people on the team are navigating these things, so be it. But on this particular scope down project, that feedback was coming directly to me. And I started to notice that it was repeated and it was getting worse. So the feedback that would come to me, I could tell a lot of frustration, a lot of opportunities where it felt like, hey, like we expect this of you, and why isn't it happening, right? Like, isn't this what we agreed upon? And I started to realize that we were not having clear enough communication, like those expectations weren't being set. And what I wanted to call out and change was that we were doing a lot of communication about these things over email. And I said, okay, I think the first step that we want to try taking here is actually getting on a call together, because however we're communicating right now doesn't seem to be effective. And I'm not saying that email isn't effective in general or chat messages aren't effective, but in this particular case, it felt for me like we kept doing this same pattern and it wasn't getting better. And it's not like I wasn't receiving the emails or they weren't receiving my responses. It's not the technology was failing. I think we were just using the wrong tool. So what we started doing was getting on some calls and saying, okay, like walk me through what your expectations are here, because clearly like we're both feeling friction. We want to address where these missed expectations are. And as we were navigating this, we started to realize that in this particular project, this team had expectations of us that they also had expectations of in the broader scheme of things. And those expectations actually did not hold even there. So this was interesting. We started to identify that the partnership between our team, like that interaction, the integration we have, we actually already had a misalignment in the broader scope, never mind even for this particular project. So this is really interesting because now we could go looking at this from multiple perspectives. One was for moving this project forward, and the other was just in our normal interactions, we have some gaps that we have to go figure out. And I wanted to call out this part in particular because I think it was a good opportunity for my team and their team to realize, oh crap, like some of the things that we're feeling friction about, we actually realize that the other side sees it a different way, and we actually are hearing and seeing their perspective now, not just reading emails and being like, oh, these guys again, or from their perspective, like, these guys never listen to us. We started to understand where those gaps were. And I think that they appreciated that we were willing to take some time to actually address working through these gaps. It wasn't a matter of like, hey, we're busy and you guys are clearly in the wrong about these expectations, like go deal with it. And it also wasn't the opposite end of the spectrum, which was like, okay, we'll drop everything and make things better. It was in the middle where we said, look, we see things differently clearly. So let's make sure we spend some time. We'll spend extra time together. We'll sit down, we'll talk, and we'll start going through these different expectations that we have in all of our integration parts. So that was the first part. I think they really appreciated that. The second part was more specific for this project that I'm responsible for. And really what's happening is that the misaligned expectations are actually starting to gate their ability to deliver things in this project as well. So given the scope of this project, there's going to be different, I guess, influences of pressure, right? Like people have expectations on my team. Their team is one of the teams that has expectations and, they're trying to meet deadlines and things, but I have other stakeholders that are depending on me as well. The same thing applies to their team. So you can imagine, not only are they frustrated that they're getting blocked by my team and specifically from me, but they're also getting other people asking them, like, what's the status of this because you're blocking us? It's kind of like a chain reaction of like, I need something from you because I need to give that to someone else, just for the scope of this project. So because they had dependencies on me and the progress that I was having was actually holding them up, we decided that we'd have more conversations about specifically how we're going to work together to address the issues. And this started by us working through a particular challenge, and they were proposing a solution that they felt would work well for them. And from their perspective, it would actually work well for other partners that we're interfacing with and not just them. But as we were working through this, we came up with a couple of different like short-term, medium-term, and long-term strategies. And what we realized was that currently no other team was in a position where they were bothered by the status of the project. They might have a similar dependency on us, but in terms of the urgency and the timing, they were able to continue on and at the pace where we were willing to solve the problems that we're working through. For this particular team, the team that called me in to feel like that interrogation that totally wasn't an interrogation, they had a dependency and an urgency that was a lot more immediate. In fact, they were completely blocked from making any progress until they had something in place. So this part of this interaction actually involved us kind of navigating some different solutions to these challenges, like I said, these different time horizons. And what we discovered is that for their solution that they were proposing, it wouldn't be sustainable for us, but we did agree that it would make sense for them to go with in the short term. And of course, while this wasn't a situation where it was like, hey, look, my team is going to do all the work for you. Don't worry about it. So sorry. It was really a kind of a situation where we were like, this doesn't really apply, but we'll work with you on coming up with the solution. And we all agree that it makes sense for you guys to go work on. And they did. And it worked. And they were happy. And the other reason that they were happy is because we had this other part to the conversation, which was, hey, look, we understand that this is a temporary thing. We have these two other plans coming up that we think are going to help alleviate that pressure for you. So it was really this balance of like, yes, we hear your challenge. Yes, we appreciate your solution. Your solution is not something that's going to be sustainable for our team. So if you want to go with that, we do think that we have these two other follow-up solutions, and we tried to give some timelines that we think when we deliver on them, they'll help you as well. And we collaborated on this, right? So it wasn't in isolation where it was just like, go away, you go figure it out, not our problem. We had conversations about it. We exchanged a lot of emails and some designs, and we worked on it together. Ultimately, they implemented it, and ultimately they unblocked themselves, but we did work together on coming up with what we thought would be a good path forward. And I feel like this part was really a start of forming this partnership where we were transforming some of this friction into like a positive momentum. The point that I made before was about transforming some of the communication style from email into calls. I think for us, that ended up working really well. And going forward, I've noticed that there's been a couple times where an email will pop up and it's like, hey, like, same pattern, like this isn't working, or what about this? I thought we had this expectation. And I'll put my hand up right away and just say, hey, let's get on a call, right? Because I think that for our teams working together, we've had just challenges with emails conveying the right meaning, the right urgency, and the different expectations that we have. Okay, so how can you apply this in your software engineering if you're working on teams or if you're experiencing friction with different teams? I think fundamentally, this all comes back to expectations. Now, a lot of you don't actually know that I have a podcast. It's called Dude, Where's My Code? We had to pause it for a little bit just because my partner had some really exciting life changes in the beginning of the year, and we're going to revive it soon. But one thing we talk about in Dude, Where's My Code episodes almost all of the time is expectations. We talk about software engineering management, and expectations come up nonstop. It's like one of the key sources for friction, unhappiness, whatever it happens to be, disengagement. It always comes back to misaligned expectations because people have a different viewpoint, and when that's not being met, that's when the friction starts to kick in, right? Because you're expecting something that's not actually what's either reality or what someone else is working on for alignment. So if I'm working in this direction and you're working in that direction, but we both expected we were going this way, like it's not going to feel good for either side, right? Now, when it comes to expectations and friction and working in teams, I think that when you start to experience friction with other teams, instead of going to this place where you're like, I don't know, like creating an us versus them dichotomy where it's easy for you to talk with people on your team and be like, oh, these guys again, or, I hate working with this team, or these guys are annoying, whatever, right? Instead of going to that, and I feel like that's kind of a normal tendency as humans when we're getting frustrated by something, it's easy to be in that position where you're frustrated by it, right? You just don't want to deal with it. They're going through the same thing. They're having the same type of experience where they're like, oh man, I hate reaching out to this team. These people never respond, whatever, right? You have friction that's being created. Try to lean into how do we align on expectations, because I can almost guarantee when this friction comes up, whatever teams that you're working with, it's probably because expectations are different. Now, when it comes to aligning on expectations, think about, like I was going through, your communication channel. This team was repeatedly trying to reach out to us, expressing frustration, expressing where they felt the expectations were misaligned. And I think that the reality was that the email was not delivering the sort of the intent of the message as strongly as it could have in a conversation. So no fault of theirs, but that was the one subtle change that I feel like I made, which was if we get on a call, so we have a different mechanism of communicating, I think that the urgency or the sort of the magnitude of the friction will come through a lot more clearly. And I strongly encourage you to think about when you're experiencing friction with other teams, like think about how you're communicating, right? I'm just going to make up another example. Maybe it's someone on a different team is always shooting you a message on Teams or Slack or some other messaging platform, and you're getting frustrated by it because you're like, why is this person always messaging me? Like, go deal with it some other way, right? Like that's already an example of friction where you're like, I don't want to deal with this. But you could take the time to align with that person who probably has different expectations. Like, hey, look, I can reach out to this individual. They're easily accessible. I can express my frustration or my challenges, and I have a hope that they'll help me. That's their expectation. And yours is quite the opposite, where you're like, there's a good mechanism of communicating for this, like raise it to, an email alias, whatever. Take the time to align with them instead of just going to this position of, this is frustrating, I don't like it. And I truly think that when we focus on things this way, you can actually find some really powerful partnerships with people and teams that you never thought that you would align with. And it sounds a little bit extreme. I don't mean to say that this other team that I was referring to at Microsoft, that I saw them as the enemy or anything like that. Certainly not the case. But there was a lot of friction. I'm not going to deny that. And I don't think if I asked them that they would say that things were perfectly smoothly the entire time. So I think that my point here is you can find some really good partnerships when you have two or more groups that are experiencing friction together. Because if you start aligning on how do we get through this friction, you actually get positive momentum from both sides, or if there's more than two groups, all sides involved. And in our particular case, what started to happen is that we're now rallying together around common challenges, right? This team's depending on me. I'm telling them I'm blocked. And now we're able to work together to go to the next set of challenges as a cohesive group, not just a matter of like, oh, okay, you go deal with it. They're very invested. They're a primary stakeholder. They're like, hey, look, we'll help. Now that we know what the problem is or the challenge is, we'll help you get to that resolution. And again, I'm bringing this up because you can find these opportunities where you have frustrated groups, whatever it happens to be, and you channel all of that like friction that's kind of slowing both groups down into positive momentum to go tackle other challenges together. So I realize that some of this might sound like it's kind of like, maybe it sounds a little bit silly, like I'm talking about, changing friction into positive momentum, and it's like, we're just talking about software engineering here, like it's not really like that complicated, but I think it is. I think that the most complicated parts about software engineering are nothing to do with code, nothing to do with programming, and quite frankly, nothing to do with technology. I think engineers are brilliant people. They can solve all sorts of problems. I think that they're highly motivated to do so. And software engineers, especially by creating code and automation to do that, I think the biggest challenges we face in software engineering come from sort of the human side of things. How do we interact together? How do we align with people? How do we get the same expectations? And how do we work cohesively together on common goals, especially when it feels like we have different priorities? So I hope that you found this helpful. I did want to walk you through a very real situation that happened to me recently because I thought it was a really cool evolution of, teams that are experiencing friction and then coming together to actually channel all of that into a really positive partnership where I honestly feel like I can go to them and I have full support that they will back me on trying to tackle challenges together. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you found it useful, and we'll see you next time.